I am going to begin James chapter 3, choosing the right words, okay? And so we're going to see how this works for us this evening. James chapter 3. Now, can we go ahead and acknowledge the fact that choosing the right words are not always easy? Have you ever noticed that? Have you ever had something where you just really didn't know the right word? What's that candy commercial that they have on TV where the guy puts the candy in his mouth? Snickers. Is that a Snickers? It's time for Snickers? Have you ever had a Snickers moment where you think maybe I should have put a piece of candy in my mouth and see what happens, okay? I had one of those years ago, and I've told the story countless times and have gotten pretty much the same reaction to it every time I tell it, but I always do ask Karen for her permission. One time she came home from the beauty shop and she asked me, she said, honey, and she had her hair done differently, and she said, how do you like my hairdo? To which I did attempt to find the exact word that balanced honesty with kindness, and so the word that came to my mind was the word rustic. Now, I'm really not sure the appropriate words to tell a lady when she comes to you and says, how is my hair, particularly your wife, and that's the only person's hair I would comment on. So she said, how is your house? And I wanted to say something, but there was no Snickers nearby. And so I said, well, honey, it looks rustic. And I will tell you, I am not sure the appropriate word to use, but I will tell you, men, if you're ever in this situation and the word rustic comes to your mind, I would run as quickly as possible, because that is not the correct word. There are many probably other correct words, but the word rustic is not the correct word to give your wife when she asks you how your hair is done. I wish I could tell you that's the only time I put my foot in my mouth, and I've used words I wish I had not used, but I am actually quite good at it. I can do it. I can put my foot in my mouth, and I can do the jig as well as the next guy, okay? And so sometimes choosing the word is not easy. So I wish I could give you tonight like the ultimate thing, that if you had this thing, you would never misspeak again. You would never put your foot in your mouth. You would never hurt anybody's feelings. You would never regret what you said. But that's called death, okay? Because until you die, you're going to have a challenge to balance out the words you use, okay? So what I want to do tonight is look at James chapter 3. And we're going to work through here to help us in choosing the right words, okay? It is not easy. So I want to acknowledge up front that sometimes you use a word or a phrase, or you say something, you think, well, maybe I shouldn't have said that quite that way. By the way, that's where the rock can help you. That's where, asking the person you're talking to questions, you understand. And by the way, when you do misspeak and you said something you should not have said, the only right response is, I'm sorry, please forgive me. Okay, that's the only real response, okay? Trying to explain away what you said that you should not have said really doesn't work, okay? So, but with that said, I want to look at this chapter, and I want to challenge us to connect with our thinking in the book of James, which talks about the life that a Christian should live with genuine faith. Look at chapter 1, if you would, please, and first in verse 19. It says, wherefore, my beloved brethren, let everyone be swift to hear, slow to speak, slow to wrath. And then look at verse 23. For if any man be a hearer of the word and not a doer, he is like a man that beholdeth himself in the natural face in a glass. For he henceforth, he beholdeth himself and goeth his way, and straightway forgetteth what manner of man he was. We have to be careful that we understand that we don't forget and get used to our use of words if they're not the right use of words. Most of us, all of us, grew up in a home setting of some kind, okay? And we grew up in a home setting that created an environment. Some of you, how many of you that are here tonight grew up in a very quiet home? A very quiet, along with my wife. How many of you grew up in a very quiet home? A few of you, okay? How many of you grew up in a home that was quite noisy and expressive and quite vocal? Raise your hand. Okay. Then how many of you didn't grow up at all? No, we won't ask that question. Okay. Okay. So we have different homes, okay? I remember Karen saying that when we started dating, that she had to go home, usually had to spend some time at my house and take an aspirin or something for a headache because the noise was so loud. I wasn't sure what she was talking about because to me it sounded quite normal. Every room had a TV that had a TV, had the TV on. Everybody that could talk was talking. Everybody that could listen was not listening. But that's how we handled life on a regular basis in our house. So we just all talked and made noise. And we liked to raise our voice, and we liked to express ourselves in ways that probably wasn't the most effective, but we all liked it, so we just did it. So everybody has different households, and we all grew up with different vocabularies, did we not? You grew up with a way of saying things that's unique to how you grew up. Some of those expressions are maybe appropriate, some of them are not appropriate. I grew up in a household that had certain expressions that were more than fine to use, but other words were not really for polite company. And so you have to work through that because what happens is what Remo has said so many times in the men's Bible study on Wednesday morning. By the way, we have one this coming Wednesday morning at 8, gentlemen. If you want to come, be here at 8 for that Bible study here in the fellowship hall. But he said, you know, when you have things happen to you in your younger years, sometimes it makes an impression on your spirit that never actually leaves you. And sometimes those vocabularies can come back to your mind, or there's that way of saying things. You never really, remember when your dad used to say that and it bothered you, and now you hear yourself saying it yourself, and you think, well, that sounds like my father. I didn't like it back then. Why am I saying it now? Because the fruit does not fall far from the tree, does it not, sometimes? And so we have to work through that, okay? So I want to give you 3 principles I'd like to help you from James. Number one, very simple. Number one, choose to understand the importance of each word. We say so many words, we talk so much. The average person uses thousands of words a day. Some say that women use more words than men. That may be true, but I think it's more a personality thing. I know Karen and I one time heard that women use 40,000 words a day and that guys use 10,000 words a day, something like that. I doubt it has any real basis in science, but that's what this article said. And Karen and I agreed that I must use 58,000 words a day, and she uses 4. And because I think it's more personality as to anything else. But anyhow, it is what it is, okay? So, but we have to understand the importance of every word. Look at verse 1. My brethren, be not many masters. Now, the word masters there has nothing to do with master and slave. It means to be teachers. And he's speaking here of people who were in the teaching ministry, okay? And he says, be not many teachers, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. Now, the condemnation is not like we're going to be condemned to hell, but what it does mean is we're going to be in a greater judgment. You see, if you're a teacher, you're using a lot of words. So you Sunday school teachers, please understand this, that you're going to be held accountable for all those words you use during Sunday school and during preaching. Now, I've probably averaged 3 messages a week, probably for the last 40 years. Now, I don't know how many that is. That's a lot of messages. That's a lot of words. And so what that means is I am accountable for every one of those words, okay? Okay? When I was on message and when I spoke in the flesh. You say, well, you spoke in the flesh? I've been pastoring for 40 years. I've preached thousands of sermons. I guarantee you I've said something I shouldn't have said, okay? Something that God didn't want me to, and probably some of the stuff that was most impressive to people probably that God didn't want me to say. You say, well, what was it? Well, I'm not sure about it. I wouldn't have really said that. I know at the time probably, or I shouldn't have wanted to say it, but it happens, okay? So what we learn here is that every word of a teacher is going to be held accountable, okay? Now, some people look at verse 2 and think now he changes courses completely, but it actually doesn't. In verse 2, it goes with the verse 1, because it takes that concept and spreads it out. For in many things we offend all. The word "thee" there, that refers to everybody. For if any man offend not in word, the same is a perfect and able also to bridle the whole body. What he does in verse 2 is that now he broadens out and he says, you know, everybody's words are important, okay? And he also magnifies the fact that controlling our speech is in fact a sign of maturity. So if you're watching children, a young child falls and they skin their knee or bruise their hand and they start crying as if the whole world should stop, right? The whole world should stop and listen to my expression of my displeasure, okay? Now, unfortunately, some children never grow up. Do you not know of some adults who take it upon themselves to tell everybody how they feel all the time about everything. And not just on talk radio or cable news. I mean, we just constantly express themselves and want everybody to hear what they have to say and just do their thing, okay? But the reality is we all need to control our speech, and there is an importance. Now, with that in mind, hold your place here, and let's look at Matthew chapter 12. Let's move over to Matthew chapter 12 and look at verse 34, okay? This is an important principle to understand. At Matthew chapter 12 and verse 34, O generation of vipers, how can ye being evil speak good things? And look at verse 34. For out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaketh. Have you ever said something and when you were pressed on it, this is in Matthew 12:34, you said something like this: well, I've had a bad day. Or, I just don't feel good. Or, you said this other thing. Trying to explain away our inappropriate speech. But what does verse 34 tell us about where the words come from? Somebody help me. Where do the words come from? Our heart. Our heart. You know why we dislike pressure and difficulties and pressure in our life? Because when we're under pressure, it reveals the condition of our heart. Some of us have had our heart revealed the last 2 months to us in very stark reality. Our heart, our speech, it reflects our heart. Look at verse 35. A good man out of the good treasure of the heart bringeth forth good things, and an evil man out of the evil treasures of the heart bringeth forth evil things. But I say unto you, now watch this, every idle, every useless or wrong word that a man shall speak, hurtful word, they shall give an account therefore in the day of judgment. For by the words thou shalt be justified, and for thy words thou shalt be condemned. You say, well, what does verse 37 mean? Well, see, look back if you would please, out of verse 34. Your word reflects your heart. So you say what you say because of the condition of your heart. When I read verse 36 and I'm reminded that every word shall be judged, I'm thinking, boy, judgment day must be going to last a long time because we've used a lot of words, have we not? And every word, now let's go back to a principle. Every word is important, okay? Now here's what we do, okay? We tend to qualify the importance of our words, okay? Well, I just said it. I didn't mean, have you ever heard this? Well, I didn't mean anything by it. I didn't mean anything by it, okay? But you said it, okay? That's why, remember I mentioned this morning the danger of humor and using humor to tear somebody down, okay? Write this, if you're taking notes, write this down. I want to give you the formula, this is called the formula of humor. This is, if people, you think about what's funny, here's what's funny. Humor is pain plus time and distance. Humor is pain plus time and distance. Example, have you ever been to the Lost Colony? Have you ever seen old Tom? Old Tom, is that the drunk? Old Tom? Okay. Now, is Old Tom there for historical, factual information or for comic relief? He's for comic relief. If you don't know who Old Tom is, then the whole thing is irrelevant to you. But he's a drunk at the Lost Colony play, okay? Now, you understand the reason why that's funny is because it touches at a point of pain, which is alcoholism. But it's only funny if there's distance between you and that pain. If you go to the Lost Colony and you have a loved one that you just killed by a drunk driver in an accident the night before, you're probably not going to think of Old Tom's very funny because there's not enough distance there. So humor is pain plus time and distance. So when you make jokes about things, that's why you understand things people laugh about the most always tend to have a significant element of reality in it, truth with it, or at least perception in it, okay? And that's why when we use humor to cut people down, we're actually conveying stuff that doesn't need to be conveyed, all right? So every word is important, okay? Number two, okay? In verses 3 down to verse 12, after our text, you have to choose to respect the power within each word. Not only is every word important, but I have to understand the power that is inherent in each word. And it's quite significant, okay? Look at verse 3. Behold, we put bits in the horse's mouth that they may obey us, and we turn about the whole body. Now, I've been on a horse a couple of times, but horses can be quite huge animals, okay? But I have seen people that are very petite control animals that are quite large in this fashion, okay? Look at verse 4. Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with so small a helm, whithersoever the governor listeth. And you know that which governs a ship, a very large ship, is quite small in relation to the overall ship. The point of verse 3 is the bit in the horse's mouth is quite small compared to the overall size and weight and strength of the animal, okay? Look at verse 5. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasteth great things. So now in verse 5 draws the end of the word picture in verses 3 and 4. And now he turns that word picture and says, you know, this small thing that has such great power. Now watch this. That there's a challenge here. Look at that last part of verse 5. Behold now how great a matter a little fire kindleth. Okay? And the idea of here comes the scope of this, okay? The idea of the reference to the matter, by the way, here has the idea of either a pile of wood or actually a whole forest. And the idea here is that the tongue can cause a great fire. And then verse 6 magnifies that. And the tongue is a fire, a world of iniquity, so that it is the tongue among our members, that defileth the whole body, and setteth on fire the course of nature, and is set on fire of hell. And what he does here is he uses two dynamics of the power, of destructive power of hell, to denote how it destroys things, but also how it's related to the fire of hell. And the idea here is to understand, you need to respect the value of it. Why? Because in verses 4, 3, 4, and the first part of verse 5, it can move things, it can shape things. It can shape things. If you don't believe that, remember that contract you wish you hadn't signed? It's a written word, okay? Remember one time Karen and I we've only bought one brand new car in our lifetime, our marriage, our lifetime too, but, and it was a real lemon, okay? You ever had a lemon that you can't make lemonade out of? It's a brand new car. And, but I had an obligation to pay for it, okay? And so I was stuck with it, okay? And so the idea here is that we know that sometimes our words can lead us in one way or the other, but it also then, not only can it lead us, but it can destroy things, okay? That we need to respect not only the power of it, but the destructive force within it, okay? And then look at verse 7. For every beast of the birds and the serpents and the things which in the sea is tamed, and hath been tamed of mankind, which is basically referring in general to man's ruling over the natural world around us. There's not a specific reference here to SeaWorld and the animals being tamed and the old Shamu thing or whatever. That's not what he's talking about. The idea is that man has got control over the natural realm, okay? But look at verse 8. But the tongue can no man tame. It is an unruly evil full of deadly poison. So what James is talking about here is to respect the power of the tongue because it can direct our paths, as it does in verses 3, 4, and 5. It can destroy things, and it has an extraordinary power that is difficult to control, okay? Now look at verse 9. Another reason to understand the respect every word. Look at verse 9 down to verse 12, how it reveals our heart. Wherewith bless we God, even the Father, wherein curse we man, which is made after the similitude of God. Out of the same mouth proceedeth blessings and cursings. My brethren, these things ought not to be, that the fountains send forth at the same place swift water and bitter. Can a fig tree, my brethren, bear olive berries? either a vine figs, so can no fountain both yield salt water and fresh. Now here, what he's talking about in verses 9 through 12 is the fact not only, he talked about how the words can direct our paths, it can destroy things, and they're very difficult to control. But in verses 9 to 12, what he's saying is, it reveals my heart. The reason why I can bless God and curse man is because my heart isn't right. The heart is the issue here. The heart is that thing that is dictating my words. You see, we've come accustomed to facilitating our inappropriate words. We've gotten so used to saying things that should not be said and excusing ourselves, we just say, well, I'm just human, okay? That's just the way I am. But in reality, what it reveals is a heart that is not where it ought to be. You see, we do joke about, not a joke, but we make a point. We don't complain about the weather, the traffic. Why? Because God takes grumbling personally, okay? And see, when we accommodate inappropriate speech, we are accommodating a heart that is not where it ought to be. And here's the danger of a heart that is not where it ought to be. When we can accommodate that, there's no limit to the depth or breadth it can take us away from God's will. You see, when we are just not thinking right in our hearts, there is no telling what can happen to us, okay? So what James does here in the first 12 verses is explain to us the importance of every word in verses 1 and 2, and that needs to be understood, but then the power of the word that has to be spoken. I remember, I've seen it, I've done it, and I've seen my sons do it, I've seen other people do it, other men do it, and I've seen ladies do it too, and that is this, a situation, not just in marriage, but in other situations too. I've seen situations where the importance of the words being used were not thought through, and words were allowed to be said that should not have been said, and it changed the course of everything and led to a very difficult and sad conclusion, okay? Remember, we mentioned this before, men are thermostats in the home. So men, it is important what we say in the home. That certainly is true. But the fact is, our tongues are the thermostat that we all use to control the atmosphere around us, okay? You do realize that you control the atmosphere, okay? You wake up in the morning and you're grumpy. Well, what are you doing? You say, well, I'm grumpy because I don't have a cup of coffee. Now, I'm trying to remember where that is found in Scripture. I'm not sure, okay? But I'm grumpy because I haven't had my cup of coffee. As if not having a cup of coffee somehow allows you to use words or to say things in a way that are not appropriate. And where do you get that from? Where do we get that from? Well, you know, I'm tired. Okay, well, you're tired. I'm so sorry that you're tired. Take a nap maybe, but I'm sorry you're tired, but why do we think that because we're tired, or because we haven't had a cup of coffee, it's no different than saying, well, I'm old. I'm old, so I've got to the point in life where I can say whatever I want to say. None of that stuff is true. But isn't it true that all of us have our special way of excusing words that we shouldn't use, okay? It's the coffee, it's the fatigue, it's the time of day, it's a bad day at work, it's a bad day at school, or it's the woman thou gavest me, Lord, it's the wife thou gavest me, Lord, or the husband I gave me, Lord, it's my parents, it's my siblings. Aren't siblings a wonderful excuse to speak inappropriately? And none of the siblings here would do this, of course, but there are siblings like that who will use things, not just siblings growing up, but older siblings. Most of us have siblings, okay? And we can use it as an excuse to say things we shouldn't say. Now with that, let me give you the third point, then we'll land the plane. Number 3, okay? We need to understand, go ahead and put up the number 3, please, okay? Okay? We need to choose to value the wisdom needed for each word. Now, in verses 13 to 18, I'm going to give you 3 things to write down if you're taking notes, and hopefully this will help you to choose the words that are helpful to you, okay? All right? Number 1, okay? I need to understand my responsibility in verse 13. When the wisdom, I have to choose to think. I have to choose to think. In fact, letter A, I think I would write that down for point A. I have to choose to think. I can't put my brain or my mouth on automatic pilot while my brain is in neutral. It's not healthy. Look at verse 13. Who is a wise man endued with knowledge among you? Those are two words that are not synonyms for each other. They're actually two different dynamics of our brain mindset, okay? The word wise is a general term which means the best means to the best end. It was a wise man is one who says, what is the best thing for me to say here, okay? But the word understanding I think it's the only time it's used, I think, in the New Testament. It means to have critical knowledge, have skillful knowledge on how to execute something, okay? A skillful knowledge on how to execute something, all right? So you've had the training and you know what to do in the situation, okay? And so what he's saying here is he's speaking, he's talking here in this passage 13 through 18 about what should govern our speech. And he says the responsibility we have in verse 13 is to be wise and to be knowledgeable. But then, look at the next phrase, let him show out a good conversation or lifestyle, his works. And look at the next phrase, with meekness of wisdom. Now, what is meekness of wisdom? The word meekness is to submit, okay? And so the idea is when I am meek, I am moldable, I am responsive. And so what he's saying in verse 13, that I need to respond to the wisdom I have and to the knowledge I have about this situation. By the way, for husbands, 1 Peter 3:7 comes to mind. Dwell with your wife according to knowledge. You should study your wife to know what she needs to hear from you and when she needs to hear it. Okay? In 2 Timothy chapter 2, I think it's verses 13 through 16, it talks about how we who teach others need to be wise and skillful in how we communicate the truth of God's word. All right? So the idea here is that we're to take the responsibility to think before we talk. So right there, we got to think before we talk. Okay? So that's the responsibility. Letter B, I have to understand the value of the wisdom, I need to understand the wisdom of understanding the danger I must confront. Not only must I think before I speak, but I must be always conscious of the danger I'm facing. And in verses 14 through 16, he lays out a number of dangers that are consistent in our lives in the area of our speech. Now, these issues are applicable in other areas, but in the context here, he's speaking about speech. So what he's saying here is be careful that these things don't control your speech. Verse 14, but if we have bitter envying. Now, bitter means that which makes something useless, and envy is desiring something that you do not have. So he's saying be careful when this envy that makes things useless, okay, are governing you. That's a danger when it comes to speaking. I am envious. I want to manipulate. I would suggest to you that is can be a reference, at least in application format, if not an interpretation format, to the area of trying to manipulate other people. Be careful in trying to manipulate people with your speech. And then strife has in your heart. That means not to be at peace. When I am speaking to people, and I am self-willed with this strife in my heart, that I'm going to say things I shouldn't say. Verse 15, this wisdom described in verse 14 of bitter envying and strife, okay, descendeth not from above, but is earthling, sensual, and divisive, okay, or devilish. In other words, when I'm controlled by my own desire with the bitter envy and with my strife in my heart, then I'm going to wind up that's what's known for this worldly mindset without God. Now, verse 16 magnifies the thought even further. For where envy and strife is, there is confusion and every evil work. That's the consequence in verse 16 of the bitter envy and the strife in verse 14. Okay? The confusion means disorder or instability. Okay? Every evil work is sin in general. And so what he's saying here is that when I am controlled by my envy, I want my will to be done. I want to manipulate the situation so my wife, my husband, my children, my parents, my work associates, my friends, my employer, my employee will do what I want them to do. I want my kingdom done here, okay? When that's controlling me, okay, I'm going to have strife in my heart. I'm not going to be at peace, and that is a danger I must avoid. I have a responsibility I must to accept. I've got to think before I speak, but I have a danger I have to be constantly aware of, that I can go in that wrong direction. So that's why I have to examine. That second point goes much along with the first point. I got to think about what I'm saying and why I'm saying it. You might look at it this way. The first point is I've got to think about what I'm saying. Letter B, I got to think why I'm saying it. Am I saying it for the right reason, or is there envy and strife in my life? Okay? That leads me to a third point, not only the responsibility to think before I speak and the danger of being controlled by my self-will that I must avoid, but I must also have the wisdom to understand the commitment that God calls me to give. And there are 6 of them here. Very quickly, I'm just going to mention them to you. They're pretty self-explanatory. And there are 6 of them. I'll give them to you, and then we'll land the plane. Okay? If I'm going to choose the right words, first of all, I need to have a clear conscience. Number 1, I have to have a clear conscience. If I am guilty, I will say things I should not say in ways I should not say them. Okay? The wisdom that is from above is first pure. The idea of pure is being free from contamination, from without and from within, and involves a clear conscience inside and outside my life. I am not working out of guilt. When you are a guilty person, guilty people will say things they should not say, okay? Then, peaceable, okay? Now, what happens, okay, so if I'm a guilty conscience, number 1, I have to clear conscience. Number 2, I have to be not self-willed. I have to abandon my self-will. I got to stop thinking the world revolves around me. That's a phrase I like to use as regularly as I can out in public to remind myself when I'm at a place of a business or whatever, and they say, would you please wait? I remind myself the world does not revolve around me. I've been through a couple of lines getting food. You know, we've been ordering online, and you just can't go to a restaurant. And more than once recently, I have not been getting what I've ordered. Those things happen, okay? And those things can happen. But we have to be careful about our self-will. And it gives you 3 terms that challenges about our self-will. First of all, the word peaceable, okay? Which means to seek peace whenever possible. Now, we'll talk about that at greater length next 2 Sunday mornings or in Sunday school, where we talk about how to have disagreements with people without losing the relationship, if at all possible. That's for the next 2 Sunday mornings in Sunday school. But here to be peaceable, okay? To seek to make peace if possible. And then to be gentle. And there's no direct, this particular Greek word, there's no single English word that really translates. It means to be equitable, to be fitting, to be fair, to be patient. There's all the shades of meaning of that particular word, okay? But all of it demands that my self-will not be what dominates me. And then easy to entreat, which means to be reasonable. And each of those expressions, peaceable, gentle, and easy to retreat, speak of a person whose self-will is not dominating them. Number 3, I've got to be kind. It says merciful. Merciful is taking pity on people who are in difficult situations. Fourthly, I have to have genuine faith. It says good fruits, and that goes back to the genuine faith in James chapter 2, verses 14 through 20. I've got to be living out my life before God and before others. And then I've got to be unwavering. It says without partiality. The idea of that is to be not always moving around all over the place, but being stable, unwavering. And then number 6, I have to be true in that I'm not a hypocrite. I've got to be real. What I see, what people see, is what there actually needs to be. Now, a clear conscience, the absence of self-will, kindness, genuine faith, unwavering commitment to God's will, and being truthful without hypocritical practices in my life are all the commitments that I need to have the wisdom that governs what I say. Now, here's the ending thought, okay? We say what we say because of the condition of our hearts and the practice of our life. We speak from the inside of our experience. You know the old phrase, what's in the well is coming up in the bucket. You've heard that before, right? What does that mean? If you have a well and you drop it down, and what are you going to pull up? What's ever in the well. In the well is healthy water that will nourish you. You'll pick it up and you'll be healthy. If in the water, the well water, there's been a dead animal there that fell in there last 2 weeks ago and has been decomposing, and you take it up and drink it, it's not going to be healthy for you, okay? Because the bucket simply reflects or conveys what's inside. The most humbling thing about our speech is, that's what our speech does. How do you feel about that? You're saying, that's the real reason we say what we say. Not because we're tired, not because we've had a bad day, not because my dad was that way or my mom was that way, or because this person acted that way or that person acted that way. I speak the way I speak because I am the way I am. I need God's wisdom to guide me. So I need to accept responsibility and ask myself, am I willing to do what's best? Am I willing to think through and let God lead me to specifically how I should speak in this situation? That responsibility to think before you speak needs to, and that's why you need to ask God for wisdom, okay? You need to avoid the danger of being bitter and strifeful and so forth, and you've got to understand the commitment you have to make in your own life to walk with Him. So if you want to use the right words, okay, you don't need to Google it. What you need to do is deal with your heart, and then you'll speak the right words.